Evil gods have descended, plunging the world into apocalypse and chaos as humans turn into zombies. As always, our MC is betrayed by his girlfriend and best friend, but he somehow magically goes back in time to change everything. Along with this, he gets the power to control the flames and a whole prison of evil gods at his disposal. In this prison, time stands still, and he can store food without worrying about it spoiling, and even animals and captives, without fear of them escaping or starving to death. Let's find out how it all began. The blood moon rose on top of the ruined city. In the rubble of the broken metropolis, our MC Cheyenne had been beaten, bloodied, and broken in the distance. Demons wreaked havoc without a single ounce of mercy for the population. Their strong strides and powerful limbs destroyed skyscrapers, tearing through concrete like paper. Under the demons' command was an army of zombies, undead monsters hungry for human flesh. The few survivors tried to run for their lives, desperately clinging to non-existent hope. Our boy was continuously trampled and kicked while he was down, a witch snickering at his misfortune. She then started dousing his wounded body with gasoline, covering every inch. The witch and the caped villain said their sarcastic farewells, while they flaunt their stolen treasure. The caped villain stole the most precious thing that Xia Yin owned, the token of the sixth great hell. He looked at the man he considered his best friend, as the gasoline painfully stung his open wounds. His only concern was the well-being of his missing little sister. The villain stimulated the token, summoning the power of a monstrous bear that was wearing the skulls of its victims as a necklace. The smug villain confessed that Xiao Yan's adorable little sister had already been dragged to her miserable resting place for being a nuisance. At least her pure blood was still quite useful for something else. As furious as he was, Xiao Yan did not have the strength to stand up, let alone fight back. The retreating survivors looked up to the villain with hope. They knew him as Shujun, the strongest ability user blessed by the gods. As Shujun took the witch into his arms and flew away, he left Xia Yan with a painful parting gift. A lit lighter aimed to burn him alive. The giant demon continued its destructive advance until it was met with the summoned giant bear, unchained from its restraints. The gargantuan animal wrestled with the pale demon. It was a full-on kaiju battle. At the same time, Cheyenne's body was swallowed by the fiery ignition. He gritted his teeth through the agonizing sensation of his skin being burnt to a crisp as he desperately wished for a do-over. Cheyenne vowed that if the afterlife exists, he definitely won't let those who wronged him go unscathed. Fueled by hate and agony, his right eye assimilated with the flames. As he heard a playful voice granting him his wish, his heartbeat slowed to a crawl, and with one final pump, the flow of time reversed. The fiery power coalesced in his eye, as the physical and emotional pain he felt was imprinted on his soul. Cheyenne woke up in the comfort of his own bed, sweating for what seemed like a long and feverish nightmare. The wounds and the burns were gone. Could the voice he heard on the brink of death be real? He rummaged around the bed and found his phone. He saw the date July 1st, 2028, 3 whole days before the apocalypse started. Putting on a shirt, he ran to the bathroom to sober up and try to make sense of what he just went through. He still could not believe that everything had started over. He felt normal and healthy. The only difference was the change in his right eye. It turned pale gold in color, thanks to the fire seed left buried in him as he was burned to death. Cheyenne quickly took a moment to calm down and adapted to the situation. Surprisingly fast, he suited up and went out the door. He took his first steps outside and took in the sights. His neighborhood wasn't necessarily nice to look at, but all of it would look a lot worse 3 days from now. The apocalypse will arrive, and it will turn many humans into zombies, along with the descent of strange gods. Some humans would awaken powers to stand for themselves, but resistance would be ultimately futile. Cities would be turned into hellscapes, overrun by demons, with a few survivors fighting for limited resources to survive. His girlfriend, the witch Roland, and his best friend, the traitorous Shujun, would betray him without batting an eye. Speaking of the literal devil, Roland started ringing him up. Cheyenne picked up the phone, and the shrill witch's voice immediately blared. She criticized him for not answering right away, asking if he was trying to break up. Roland had always been like this. Whenever something does not go her way, she threatens to end the relationship. In the past, his foolish and pathetic self would anxiously and desperately try to appease her. But now he could not give a single flying fuck. He simply answered sure, confusing the witch. She was expecting Cheyenne to beg for forgiveness like a puppy. After all, Cheyenne doubled down, finally breaking it off with the witch. He's tired of her conniving ass. He does not want to be a glorified servant anymore. He hung up and stashed his phone in his pocket, gaining some semblance of peace. He locked in. Cheyenne knew that he had to hurry up and take care of business. With his limited time back in Rulin's home, she angrily threw her phone away after being cut off, before she could start cursing Cheyenne out. That dog of hers had the gall to hang up and block her so fast. The witch and Shujun just finished a round of smashing pissers. He asked if Cheyenne finally found out about their little fling, but that shouldn't be possible. Rulin had to lose her on a leash, never disobeying her orders and demands. Shujun just laughed. He didn't give a shit either way. He was more concerned about the message his old man sent him, about collecting some ancient family heirlooms, filled with spiritual energy, as something big might happen soon. Ruolin remembered her loser boyfriend talking about a family heirloom token before. She recalled that the ugly, centuries-old artifact is currently owned by Cheyenne. Cheyenne's sister Ruolin believed that her dog would always come back to her for forgiveness. At that time, she'll just demand the token. Pleased by her ingenuity, Shijun straddled the witch, and they went for another round of hide the sausage. The token they were just talking about was a poorly maintained slab of antique. Cheyenne had rushed over 30 kilometers in a cab to his sister's school to ask for the token, ditching his day job. Cheyenne asked what was wrong with his eyes, and he refused to explain. He just asked his little sister if she trusts her big bro. They had been incredibly close since they were young, so obviously she did. The two have always relied on each other growing up. If there is one person that Cheyenne would trust unconditionally, it would be her big bro. She knows that everything he does is for her own good. Since that was the case, Cheyenne tasked her to pack her things and come with him immediately. She obliged and asked for 2 hours to prepare her stuff. Cheyenne wanted to know why. She did not even ask for further explanation. Like she said, Cheyenne trusted her big bro more than anyone else in the world. He watched as she ran to pack her stuff up. He vowed that this time, he would make sure that Yin would be safe and sound. To do that, he will need the family heirloom resting in his palm. All he could remember was Su Jun opening some sort of portal and summoning a giant beast, using the rusty old thing. He wondered how that snake managed to do such a mythical feat. Suddenly, the fire seed in his golden eye shot out and hit the token's surface. The heat from the fire melted the rusty surface and revealed the token's original form. This is an ancient artifact connected to the sixth great hell. Xia Yin was suddenly sucked into a wormhole of sorts, traveling inside the token's separate dimension. The portal eventually spat him out into an entirely different realm, filled with perpetual darkness. In the middle of it was a giant tower, with countless crimson chains attached in every direction. He could not even find the words to explain what he was seeing. Inside the tower was a plethora of monsters and demons from all sorts of eras, locked up and desperate to get out. They all looked at him with their penetrating glares as he descended to its entrance. The monsters and demons tried to scare him with their snarls and gazes, and it was incredibly effective. Then a lightning tribulation struck the tower with an ungodly amount of force. The lightning seemingly aimed at the monsters that dared to intimidate Xiaoyang. Each one of them suffered a painful demise as the destructive power mutilated their grotesque bodies. The destructive tribulation continued to go wild, seemingly connecting to Shine himself. A mysterious power was suppressing the monsters in the tower. Right then and there he heard the same playful voice he heard before. His life was snuffed out before time reversed. The mysterious entity's lips curved into a smile. Revealing her fangs, Cheyenne's guard immediately went up and stared at the humanoid creature in front of him. She introduced herself as Sadaji, a beautiful nine-tailed fox. She extended a respectful greeting to Xia Yan, the New Hell's prison warden. You see, tens of thousands of years ago, the immortal emperor gathered 12 immortals. The three pure ones, Guanyin Fushi, Shan Nu, and others, to jointly forge the demon-suppressing tower. The finished product was dubbed the Sixth Great Hell, the nightmare of every evil incarnate out there. Throughout the ages, all sorts of powerful beasts, monsters, and demons were locked away for their grievous sins in the Tower of Endless Punishment. They suffered the torment of soul burning, heavenly lightning day and night. The pardon token in Shine's hand is the only key that can unlock the door to this fearsome place. That's also why Sadaji referred to him as the new warden, since this was his first time in this place. The fox invited him to go inside and check on his prisoners. She promised to give him a more detailed report of the place. As they walked through, curious and intrigued by what this all meant, Cheyenne took her up on her invitation. He walked up to the ominous door as if he had nothing to lose. As soon as he entered, he was greeted by the swift weaving of violent energy, bouncing around the first floor. Sadaji warned him to look out and be careful of those dancing waves. As if by instinct, his golden eye lit up, as it summoned a seemingly conscious trail of fire that protected him from the malevolent energy. Sadaji was impressed with how efficiently he handled the towers. First surprise, she identified the flame in his eyes as the nether fire seed. It must be the catalyst that made it possible for him to restart his life after death in the underworld. Sadaji also confessed that she contacted him as his life flickered away. The bond between the fox and the Jia family runs deep. She had been the guiding spirit of the sixth grade, held for a long time now, and she could not bear to see Yin get killed by pathetic villains. The despair and anger at the moment of death must have awakened his flame ability, igniting the nether fire seed. She barely had to do anything. That's one big question answered. Now that the apocalypse is inching closer once more, he won't be as useless and helpless as he was in the past. This time he was determined to do everything differently. Itching to learn more about this tower, Cheyenne asked Sadaji to proceed and lead the way. She explained that the sixth great hell is divided into 5 layers. Based on Cheyenne's soul power, the doors to another floor would light up, representing his current limit. The higher he can go, the stronger imprisoned creatures he can encounter. So he'll need to increase his soul power fast to face them. Right now, the only section is lit, and the only accessible area is the one on the ground floor. Behind the prison cell was a familiarly terrifying figure. It was the same gigantic beast that Shu Jun summoned and rode in his previous life. Curiosity got the best of Xian, and they walked a little too close to the prison cell, waking up the monster as it roared a terrifying war cry. What happened next shocked him to his core. The monstrous beast started acting like a cuddly pet, seemingly pleased to see the new warden of the prison. It praised Xian for being young and promising. The prisoners of the tower had been waiting for a new warden to arrive for thousands of years after all. The beast even offered services if Sia Yin ever needed anything. The shameless black bear even tried to sneak a kiss in, before being kicked away by Sadaji for daring to get close to the warden. As it turned out, the fox just wanted to get first dibs on licking Giant lovingly first. She did not want any competition for the warden's attention. She complained that these 1,000-year-old demon kings had only been imprisoned for a few thousand years and had already turned into attention-hungry dogs. But not everyone was like Black Bear. Some of the prisoners did not approve of the young warden, only relying on his token. The chained-up bird-looking demon would rather get struck by heavenly lightning for another 1,000 years than grovel at the kid, accounting for Sadaji and the Black Bear demon. It seems like the tower holds an untold number of legendary creatures. Cheyenne let his eyes wander until they fell on the Black Bear's next-door neighbor. He could see the demon's back, a muscular body with demonic wings attached. The demon turned around, showing its humanoid face with a sharp beak. He recognized the demon from the ancient stories and myths, the thunder god Lei Jingyi. Sadaji praised the warden for immediately recognizing another prisoner. At a glance, she clarified that in this world monsters are ranked as soldiers generals, commanders kings, sages, and beyond. Since Cheyenne only had access to the lowest level of the tower, he could only see general-level criminals. The stronger he becomes and the higher he goes, the stronger the prisoners he could encounter. It is said that the topmost layer even held sage level. Immortal criminal Sadaji had heard Lady Nua sigh about how they once held god-level beings in the tower, but they had been lost to the sands of time. The fox urged the young warden to work hard and ascend the ranks, to control the entire prison. Cheyenne was more than just a little overwhelmed by the scale of this responsibility. The tower is more formidable than anything his mind could have imagined. The general level beasts on the lowest level are already powerful enough to cause ruinous amounts of destruction. With their power, the prisoners on the top floor must be world-ending nightmares. But no matter what abomination was locked up on top, they would all just be prisoners under the warden's control. In the future, in the coming apocalypse, he has the potential to become the strongest. with his minuscule soul power. This is as far as they can go for now. Cheyenne would have to absorb a lot more soul power to light up more rooms and ascend. Sadaji also expounded that soul power is different from awakened abilities. Abilities can be strengthened by absorbing crystal cores from zombies and mutants. Soul power, on the other hand, can only be obtained by killing gods. In 3 days, when those deities descend upon Earth, his hunt will officially begin. Before eradicating the gods, he needs to make all the necessary preparations. Cheyenne found himself in the busy antique street. In his previous life, someone stumbled upon a binding, immortal rope from one of the stalls, and became a powerful ability user. At this point in time, the treasure should still be for sale on this street. Thankfully, the energy radiating from the antique display cannot escape his nether. Fire Seed, coincidentally, the head of the Song family and father of Sujin, Song Tian, is also roaming the streets to shop with Elder Huang, his trusted antique appraiser. Song Tian spotted Cheyenne looking around stalls, confused that the young man had an interest in the wares. He remembered reminding his son to pick friends that would be useful, one way or another. And Shujun assured him that Cheyenne was just a foolishly loyal guy who was easy to manipulate. Song Tian did not pay the young man too much attention and continued their search for valuable antiques. Elder Huang assured him that with his discerning eyes, they could get a decent haul. It's too bad that most antiques on display are useless. Song Tian just got back from an ancestral worship ceremony where he dreamt of his ancestors, telling him to search for ancient artifacts. He did not know what for, but he decided to give it a go. Suddenly, Elder Huang lit up at the sight of a gourd tied to the door of one of the antique shops. The old man immediately ran to snag it for the taking, but someone else had already gotten to it. The shop owner was glad to find another gullible customer. He could scam, but that gullible customer was Giant. The owner spouted some bullshit about the gourd being an artifact from the Ming dynasty. He set the price at 10,000, and Giant immediately recoiled. At such an expensive price tag, the young man pretended to inspect the gourd for any damage or peculiarities. He argued that the gourd had cracks and it was tied with a cheap broken string. Cheyenne started haggling for the antique, setting his price at 100 yuan at most. The shop owner immediately grabbed the gourd out of his hands and told him to piss off at that moment. Elder Huang and Song Tian swooped in to inspect the antique for themselves, not knowing that Xia Yin had already received the treasure for free. It was the shoddy red string tied around the gourd. No one could have thought that the inconspicuous little string would become so valuable in the coming days. It is the magical treasure dubbed as the binding immortal rope. He was only able to spot it thanks to his nether fire seed vision. Quietly tucking the magical treasure in his pockets, he decided to stick around to have a little bit of fun and do a little bit of trolling. In his previous life, his little sister was captured by the Song family. After stealing the token, they used her as a blood sacrifice for some twisted ritual. This time, Big Bro is hell-bent on making the whole Song clan pay. Elder Huang verified that the gourd has some spiritual aura of ancient origin. He must have sensed the remnant power of the string. Trusting the old man's vision, Song Tian asked for the price of the gourd. Xiao Yin slightly interrupted and called Uncle Song's attention with a polite greeting. Song Tian returned the greeting and made some small talk. The shrewd businessman even brought up the ancient heirloom that Xiao Yin had, saying that he wanted to talk about possibly acquiring it later. In reply to that bold proposal, Cheyenne raised his voice and name-dropped the wealthy Song Tian as loud as he could. To attract everyone's attention, he strongly implied that Uncle Song must be trying to buy something very valuable. With the streets full of enthusiasts trying to strike it rich, in Antique Street, a crowd of fanatics quickly surrounded the stall and saw the famous Elder Huang. The appraiser, the Hungry Hyenas, quickly offered a higher initial price than 10,000 for the gourd. Song Tian was irked by the ensuing bidding war, asserting that he found the treasure first. The bid had quickly reached 20,000. The antique enthusiast drove up the price to 50,000 in the blink of an eye, as the shopkeeper encouraged the bidding war to line his pockets. By the end of the brutal auction, Song Tian had to pay 70,000 more than the asking price. He was supposed to get a possible treasure for just 10,000, but ended up overpaying because of Cheyenne's stunt. The young man stuck around to talk to Song Tian about his family heirloom. Uncle Song remained civil and asked the young man to see the token. He quickly took it out of his pocket and willingly let them see it from afar. Elder Huang could already tell that the token was a real treasure, and he wanted to take a closer look to confirm. Cheyenne quickly put the token back into his pocket and denied their request for a closer look. Song Tian tried to appeal to the young man's friendship with his son, asking for a favor for his dear old uncle. Cheyenne asserted that he had nothing to do with Shujun anymore, and if there was nothing else, he'd take his leave finally. Song Tian offered compensation for just inspecting the artifact. Cheyenne took his phone out, showed them his PayPal ID, and asked for 10,000 for a 1-minute inspection. He could give them 5 minutes for a thorough look. In exchange for 50,000, Song Tian gritted his teeth and gave in. Bro is just getting scammed left and right. Uncle Song begrudgingly transferred the money over, and the young man tossed the token to Elder Huang, while the suckers were inspecting every nook and cranny of the artifact. Cheyenne was already busy spending his cash. He ordered an ample stock of water and food. Since there are empty cells in the 6th Great Hell Prison, he could just store his supplies there. Sadaji informed him that any item placed in a separate dimension would remain unchanged. He could even store some live animals there. So she requested some chickens to snack on. She was a fox after all. He bought so many essential supplies, from raw ingredients to perishables, that the vendors might think he's starting a farm. It did not take too long for him to run out of funds. Money really does run out quickly these days. After 5 minutes, he asked the old-ass duo if they wanted to buy some time extension, but Song Tian was already sold. He wanted to buy the token for himself. When the young man responded that he was open to sell, the old men lit up with glee. But the price point he set was way too much. Cheyenne started negotiations at 10 million. The glee on their faces just seconds ago vanished. Cheyenne quickly retrieved the token and asserted that it was an heirloom that had been passed through his family for thousands of years. He believes that 10 million was a fair price, but he was just giving them an unrealistic offer. With that being said, he took his leave. Elder Huang believes that the token was a genuine antique, but it should only be worth around 500,000. The old appraiser believes that he could get the token for 100,000 if they negotiated, but Song Tian was done with reasonable methods. He thanked Elder Huang for his help and asked him to take his leave. The ruthless business mogul called his son, Shujun, and ordered him to gather some clan members to find Xia Yin and his sister. He wanted the token and the siblings in one piece. That brat dared to mess with him for the whole day as revenge. He would do as his ancestors asked and prepare a young girl's blood for sacrifice. Cheyenne just happened to be the perfect candidate. Cheyenne could already tell that Song Tian was plotting his disgusting revenge. This was precisely what he was hoping for. He even regretted not extorting more money from the bastard. Cheyenne was just getting started with collecting debts for the Song family's transgressions. The young man went straight to his little sister's dorm and found Xiaoyan waiting for him outside. She was all packed and ready to go. He took her luggage, ready to finally head home for the day. Before they could leave, a pretty woman with platinum hair came running in to stop the siblings. She must have run all the way through with how disheveled she looked. This is by Xian Xiaoyan's homeroom teacher. Miss Bai tried to catch her breath and proceeded to ask why Xiaoyan suddenly got up and left school, knowing that there was an important exam the next day, an exam that would be crucial for her future. Xiaoyan introduced himself to the teacher and confessed that he was the one who was pulling her sister out of school for a temporary leave. Miss Bai argued that Cheyenne is the top student in her class. She knew that the siblings' parents had passed away, leaving Xiaoyan to take care of his sister. Miss Bai expected him to be a responsible guardian, not the type to strain his sister's future. She refused to let her most promising student go without a valid reason. Miss Bai believes that Xiaoyan has a bright future ahead, and the young man is ruining it. The passionate teacher firmly believes that, as long as the earth isn't exploding, Xiaoyan should not take this temporary leave. For whatever reason, Miss Bai quickly realized that she must have crossed a line with her words, but she was just concerned for her prized student. Feeling bad for intruding on family matters, she still insisted on continuing Xiaoyan's education. Xiaoyan took it pretty well. He thanked Miss Bai for looking out for his sister's best interests. As a token of his gratitude, he gave the teacher some valuable advice. With a serious tone, he asked her to stock up on as much food, water, medicine, and weapons as soon as she could. Most importantly, she should prepare a large supply of painkillers to help her get through the tough times ahead. Miss Bai was surprised at such a grim implication of his advice. It was as if he was saying, The world is really going to end in the coming days. Leaving Miss by stunned in silence, the siblings went on their way back. In Cheyenne's home, Cheyenne asked his big bro, "What's the plan now that she's here?" She wasn't dumb. She knew that her brother must be preparing for something big. That was about to happen. He openly admitted that there would be some drastic changes in the coming days, but swore to protect her with all his might. He fashioned the token into a necklace and made Cheyenne wear it while he goes out for a bit. He asked her to never open the door for anyone. No matter what, Cheyenne kept her cheerful attitude, promising her big bro a hearty meal when he came back. The token on her neck would allow Cheyenne to sense her whereabouts at any time. For now, he needs more funds as soon as possible. Cheyenne got out of the elevator and noticed that the witch was waiting for him in the lobby. She was on a call with someone, blatantly talking about the siblings with an irate tone. On the other side of the line was that snake Shujun, telling Rulin to keep the loser occupied while he and his boys do their thing. Seeing that Xia Yin had finally shown his face, the witch tried to use her feminine charm and invited him to grab a late-night snack with Shujun. Like old times, Xia Yin doesn't want to waste another breath with this witch. Consequently, he simply thrust her aside forcefully, but Rulan displayed either immense tenacity, or she utterly failed to grasp the atmosphere. She clutched his arm, questioning if their separation was truly happening, considering all the experiences they had shared. She presumed his behavior stemmed from childish jealousy over something. Thus, she journeyed all this distance specifically to meet with him. Cheyenne repelled her yet again, pushing firmly. The very notion that he had ever been romantically involved with her was now utterly repulsive to him. He sternly cautioned her to maintain a significant distance from him henceforth. Ruland then launched a verbal counterattack, labeling him as unappreciative. Her accusations, however, now lacked any influence over the young man. Cheyenne simply departed from the structure, abandoning the scheming, deceitful woman. Ruland's inflated self-esteem was utterly crushed, and she swiftly regressed to her typical, entitled, and utterly useless persona she embodied. Cheyenne then flourished his house's deed, waving it conspicuously, announcing his firm intention to liquidate the property. The deceitful woman was instantly alarmed. She had anticipated acquiring the residence upon their marriage. She had long considered it their designated matrimonial home. Not only did Yayin intend to sell it, but he'd also sell it significantly below its true market value. Cheyenne's conduct was simply incomprehensible to her. He'd begun asserting his own agency, and now he's divesting the house his parents bequeathed him. It occupied a highly desirable location, valued at a minimum of $3 million. That residence represented her ultimate prize. That was her motivation for pursuing him. Thinking rapidly now, Ruland reverted to her facade of gentleness, inquiring about the price he intended for the property's sale. To streamline the transaction and expedite, he was listing it for a mere $1 million. Ruland was utterly astounded by this. She surmised Cheyenne must be experiencing some kind of predicament, compelling him to sell the house to settle outstanding debts. The young man pressed on, tempting her with the possibility of acquiring such a prime asset at an incredibly low cost directly to the conniving woman. She desperately desired to purchase it for herself, yet she lacked the immediate capital to make it happen. Her only recourse was offering $300,000 as an initial payment, with the remainder later. That, however, was not an option. Cheyenne wasn't interested in any sort of installment arrangement. He demanded the full $1 million in untraceable, solid currency. Ruland weighed her options carefully. She was aware Shujun intended to inflict harm upon the siblings soon, and in her mind, Cheyenne was practically deceased already. Even if the scheming woman handed over $1 million, the sum would eventually return to her. Her sole objective was to dupe him into finalizing the property's transfer. Ultimately, the calculating woman relented and consented to the arrangement, summoning him to the real estate agency without delay. Once at the real estate establishment, Ruland quickly contacted her mother to secure the outstanding portion of the cash, reassuring her mother the funds would be recouped effortlessly and without issue. The mother, predictably, berated her for associating with an impoverished young man, to the extent of depleting her personal funds and the family's reserves to acquire his house. The conniving woman nearly swore at her own mother, but she somehow maintained her composure externally. She still believed Cheyenne's permanent demise was imminent and very soon. Growing restless, the young man pressed Ruland to expedite the payment process, enabling him to formally transfer ownership of the property. The deceitful woman believed he was walking directly into her meticulously laid financial snare. Little did she suspect, however, that she was the one ensnared in his. Once the cataclysmic end times finally arrive, every single piece of real estate on Earth will become utterly worthless. Deprived of the 1 million from her personal and familial savings, Ruolin would be left destitute, forfeiting her final opportunity for survival. The conniving woman was beaming with satisfaction as the transaction concluded, even extending an invitation to the house for a supposed celebration. On this occasion, Zia Yin did not decline her proffered invitation. As twilight descended, Shu Jun and his assembled cronies stealthily approached the rear of the residential building, brandishing weapons, anticipating Cheyenne's eventual return. Their plan was to ascend the stairs for an extremely intense discussion with his unsuspecting sister. The innocent Xiaoyan remained upstairs, diligently occupied with preparing a meal for her brother, completely oblivious to the imminent danger approaching. Unbeknownst to her, the amulet-like pendant adorning her neck began to radiate an unusual, subtle energy. Shortly thereafter, the menacing group of ruffians, spearheaded by Shijun, positioned themselves directly before the apartment entrance. The vile Shijun rapped on the door, calling out to Xiao. He anticipated that the young woman would readily unlatch the door for him, given his supposed friendship with her brother. Upon hearing the distinct knock, Xiaoyan approached the door. However, she exhibited no immediate haste to actually open it, despite recognizing Shijun's familiar voice distinctly. She informed him that her brother was currently not present, and inquired of Shijun the purpose of his visit. He chuckled in his characteristic, disarming fashion, and responded that he was already quite aware of this. The scoundrel then began to reassure her, claiming her brother had merely stepped out to purchase dinner ingredients, while he, Shijun, had been instructed to return to their home ahead. His explanation sounded entirely plausible to Xiaoyan, as she remained completely unsuspecting of what truly awaited her, just beyond the threshold of that very door. Almost instinctively, she extended her hand towards the door to open it, but then, abruptly, she recalled the specific instructions from her brother, who had cautioned her explicitly against opening the door for absolutely anyone. Her brother's admonition instantly prompted her to reconsider her action. Her trust in him, after all, surpassed anyone else's. Addressing Shijun once more, she stated he would simply need to wait until her brother came back. Her firm response rendered the scoundrel utterly furious. His amiable facade instantly vanished, and his vocal tone grew noticeably irritated. He feigned offense, claiming she clearly feared and harbored distrust towards him, and proceeded to demand that Xiaoyun unlock the door without further delay. However, with this aggressive demeanor, the contemptible jerk only exacerbated the situation, as Xiaoyun, in turn, only grew more resolute in her conviction not to open the door. Recognizing that his initial deceptive plan had unequivocally failed, Shijun resolved to employ more forceful and drastic measures. One of his accomplices had already procured a container filled with tools, which they now intended to utilize to gain illicit entry into the apartment. For these individuals, all possessing criminal histories, the act of picking locks was hardly an unfamiliar endeavor, and a relatively simple lock, such as this one, should yield within minutes. While his associate diligently worked on circumventing the lock, Shijun initiated a conversation, questioning Xiaoyan about whether the emblem representing their family was in her possession. Completely unsuspecting, she replied that her brother had only recently placed it upon her. The scoundrel's inquiry seemed largely nonsensical and out of place. Its sole true purpose was to divert the young woman's attention, while his cohorts successfully breached the door's lock. And indeed, very shortly, they had accomplished just that. The very next instant, a horde of despicable thugs brandishing bats stormed inside. Isn't it somewhat excessive, invading the sanctuary of a lone, defenseless young woman? Perhaps next time, they should amass an even larger gang to ensure success. Subsequently, the unfolding events proceeded largely as one might anticipate. They forcefully apprehended Xiaoyan, and Shijun immediately began to berate her. He began taunting her, saying how it all could have been over much faster had she simply complied and opened the door from the outset. He now felt an immense sense of power, possessing the coveted relic his father desired, as well as Xiaoyan, Xian's sister. All that lingered was the task of forcing that arrogant miscreant, Xian, to his knees, and compel his apology. After wrenching free from the scoundrel's grip, Xiaoyan started to question Shijun, demanding to know why he was perpetrating this. After all, according to her understanding, he was supposedly her brother's trusted friend. Shijun, at this juncture, had no inclination to conceal anything further. He retorted with a deranged, unsettling smirk, confessing he had only feigned friendship with her brother, because Cheyenne was a gullible simpleton, remarkably easy to control and manipulate. He didn't even attempt to hide that he'd committed many underhanded deeds, for which he fully intended to frame Cheyenne. Xiaoyan found this utterly unbelievable, yet the stark reality was indeed cruel. Shijun revealed himself to be an absolute, unmitigated scoundrel who continued to boast callously about his despicable actions, including his illicit affair with her own brother's girlfriend. His physical contact was repulsive, prompting Xiaoyan to demand her immediate release. Her defiant words, however, only served to aggravate the situation further. In direct response to her plea, the vile man merely slapped her face hard. He warned her not to entertain even the slightest thought of screaming out, threatening otherwise to crudely gag her with his disgusting, sweaty socks. Shijun's companions were, predictably, just as reprehensible as their leader. They began to question whether Shijun himself was of an appropriate age, to which he callously replied they could certainly investigate that for themselves. One can only imagine what horrors might have transpired next, had it not been for the abrupt sound of someone's laughter. The individual responsible for it then addressed the assembled thugs and inquired whether they possessed any knowledge of the legendary wine lake and meat forest. Instantly following this cryptic utterance, their immediate surroundings appeared to miraculously and rapidly transform. Merely a few fleeting moments thereafter, the thugs discovered they were now situated within a lake, surrounded by numerous alluring women. The ambience of this new place was so captivatingly beautiful that they harbored no immediate questions regarding their sudden, inexplicable arrival here. It was, for all intents and purposes, a paradisiacal setting, or so it would unequivocally appear upon initial, superficial observation. The women continuously embraced them, offering them succulent meats and reverently addressing them as kings. Upon being questioned whether they enjoyed the offered meat, the thugs enthusiastically affirmed it was exceptionally delicious. Nothing whatsoever seemed to foreshadow any impending trouble. But then, quite abruptly, the entire atmosphere shifted, and a mysterious, white-haired young woman, sporting a knowing, twisted smirk, chillingly announced the meat they were devouring was, in fact, their own flesh. Immediately subsequent to this revelation, all the alluring women abruptly and completely vanished, and the water within the lake instantaneously transformed to a sickening, blood-red hue. The arrogant smirks on the villains' faces instantly warped into abject fear and terror. The paradisiacal realm they occupied had abruptly transformed into an actual, horrifying hell. Daji, who had intentionally orchestrated this entire terrifying illusion, sarcastically inquired if perhaps they weren't enjoying the menu provided. While these miserable miscreants' minds remained ensnared within that horrifying world of illusion, back in the tangible, real world, they were physically contorting and writhing in excruciating agony. They remained entirely oblivious that their deserved retribution had merely just commenced. Xiaoyan could only observe from the periphery, not fully comprehending the bizarre events unfolding. Eventually, the terrified scoundrels began to regain some semblance of their senses, utterly petrified from their ghastly encounter with the ghost. Yet they still struggled to discern precisely where the terrifying illusion concluded, and where tangible reality actually commenced. Shijun, notably, was faring somewhat better than his cohorts, though he too failed to comprehend the origin of the spectral, ghostly illusion. He and his vile gang had undoubtedly extinguished many innocent lives before, but now, for the very first time in their wretched lives, they experienced genuine fear and profound hesitation when confronted by this small girl. Then it dawned on him. The reason could be that peculiar, enigmatic token. Shijun retrieved it from Xiaoyan and immediately began to shout aggressively at it, dismissing it as worthless, ancient junk that posed no threat to him whatsoever. However, the formidable power residing within the heirloom token held a starkly different opinion. A menacing, clawed appendage suddenly materialized directly from the token itself, and swiftly made Shijun painfully aware of who the actual refuse truly was, by inflicting deep, bleeding gashes across his arrogant face. The scoundrel instantly shrieked in agony and involuntarily released his grip on the token, which then promptly clattered and rolled across the apartment floor. It eventually came to a halt directly at Cheyenne's feet. Our protagonist retrieved it and proceeded into his now chaotic apartment. He had returned precisely in time to observe these despicable criminals firsthand and to administer their well-deserved punishment personally. Shijun's entire gang instantly comprehended the dire predicament they now faced. But just then, the conniving Rulin unexpectedly materialized, vociferously demanding an immediate explanation for the unfolding chaos. The moment her eyes fell upon the injured and bleeding Shijun, she immediately scurried over to his side solicitously. The remaining members of the gang started to recover their wits somewhat, and a recovering Shijun ordered them to prevent our hero from escaping with the treasure. Xiaoyan barely had a moment to cry out, warning her brother to exercise caution. Feeling confident due to their superior numbers and wielded bats, the despicable thugs began to advance menacingly. Launching their assault simultaneously, they fully expected to achieve a swift victory. Yet, our hero remained perfectly stationary. He harbored absolutely no fear of these pathetic underlings. However, a particular complication existed, one Daji had previously informed him about. The entity, known as the Raven General, had utilized its power, striking Shijun's face with its claw, but had acted preemptively, without obtaining Cheyenne's explicit authorization. Thereby, it had completely exhausted all of its available token-derived power. The Mighty Bear General was consequently quite frustrated at being unable to manifest and demonstrate his prowess. Our hero, however, was secretly quite pleased by this, because had the Bear General actually appeared, their modest house would have undoubtedly been utterly demolished in the process. This cramped apartment was far too confined a stage for beings of such immense power. Their opportune moment for action would undoubtedly arrive later. He could effortlessly dispatch such a pathetic assembly of lowlifes, using only his own inherent strength. Cheyenne, in fact, didn't even need to exert himself physically to unleash torrents of searing flames directly upon these contemptible scumbags. The incinerating thugs, now engulfed, failed to comprehend what was transpiring. This marked the very first occasion they had ever confronted such an astonishing, incredible power. It behaved as though the fire itself possessed a form of sentience. For astonishingly, nothing else within the room was combusting except for the thugs themselves. The inferno raged with an unimaginable, incredible intensity, and regardless of how desperately they attempted, writhing and rolling upon the floor, they simply could not extinguish it. Even water proved utterly ineffective against these flames. No matter how desperately these pathetic individuals sought salvation from ordinary water, the supernatural flames were only finally quenched once they had succumbed, falling lifeless. This was the absolute first instance Shijun and Rulin had ever witnessed such a phenomenon, and they found themselves, for the moment, utterly bereft of any words. The primary antagonist, Shijun himself, was now genuinely, deeply terrified for his own miserable existence. He possessed absolutely no prior inkling that Cheyenne could wield such magic. The terrified, manipulative Rulin desperately implored Cheyenne to keep his distance from them, and to instead somehow recall that Shijun was supposedly his best friend and she his devoted girlfriend. Our hero, however, was in absolutely no disposition to extend mercy to such vile refuse. Shijun had audaciously invaded his home, taken his beloved sister hostage, and then attempted to pilfer the precious token. And Rulin, that utterly detestable, scheming woman, had deliberately acted to divert his attention and stall for time. The mere sight of them now made Cheyenne physically ill, and yet they possessed the audacity to invoke their past, supposed friendship. Shijun struggled to his feet and began to feign the persona of the most blameless individual on earth, one who couldn't possibly comprehend what Cheyenne was insinuating. Simultaneously, and with much subtlety, he furtively whispered to Rulin, urging her to go and distract our hero, leveraging her supposed status as his girlfriend. Shijun, meanwhile, surreptitiously drew a concealed knife from behind his back and continued his charade, professing how he eagerly anticipated serving as the best man at the never-to-happen wedding of Rulin and Cheyenne. Rulin, seizing the cue, began to play her part, even asking our hero to marry her. She declared she was even prepared to overlook his apparent lack of material wealth. Such profound, selfless devotion, wouldn't you agree? The sole piece of information she truly craved was the secret to his newfound power. Promised that, and her eternal love would be his. For a fleeting moment, it appeared as though her manipulative charm had actually succeeded, and Shijun perceived this as the perfect opening to launch a treacherous sneak attack. But their entire pathetic charade was utterly futile. Cheyenne could effortlessly perceive their true, malevolent intentions beneath the transparent, cheap ploy. Consequently, he was fully prepared to dispense with them immediately and decisively. A concentrated jet of flames erupted from his eye, enveloping the reprehensible, rotten pair, and in doing so, rendered this world marginally cleaner before the impending apocalypse. Observing the consuming inferno, our hero contemplated the reason for his newfound power and arrived at a profound realization. It was all to purge this world of utterly filthy, despicable creatures like Shijun and Rulin. He resolved to incinerate all such comparable filth from the very surface of this beleaguered planet. Meanwhile, over at the Song family's ancestral estate, their entire formidable clan had congregated, convened to observe their clan leader formally address their revered ancestors. Mr. Song prostrated himself reverently before the ancestral altar and commenced his plea, asking the ancestors to bless and assist his family to ensure their accumulated wealth might become truly boundless and limitless. The ethereal spirit of their ancestors materialized from the sacred altar and imperiously demanded ancient, potent spiritual artifacts and the vital blood of a young woman in rightful exchange. The rather underwhelming ancient flask that Mr. Song had acquired at considerable expense failed to satisfy the discerning ancestral spirit in the slightest. The ancestors craved a genuine, substantial sacrifice and truly powerful artifacts. Mr. Song began to profusely assure them there was no cause for undue concern. In merely a matter of minutes, his son, Shijun, was expected to arrive bearing both the girl and the crucial artifact. But the ancestral spirit was simply incandescent with rage, forced to endure waiting upon such seemingly unappreciative and tardy descendants. Even so, it conveyed a dire and urgent message for them. The cataclysmic end of the world, a devastating worldwide apocalypse, was rapidly approaching, due in precisely 3 days. This news sounded utterly incredible to Mr. Song, yet he could not dare to question the solemn words of the ancestor spirit. Therefore, he immediately issued a resounding call to his entire clan, urgently compelling them to instantaneously dispatch all available manpower and vital resources to procure vast quantities of potable water and non-perishable food. If the ancestor spirit's dire pronouncements held true, the definitive end of their familiar, comfortable world would arrive with terrifying swiftness. Mr. Song also dispatched his trusted assistant to expeditiously locate Shijun and his captives. They desperately needed to perform the crucial sacrifice as soon as humanly possible. However, no one had sufficient time to even make a move. When the imposing main gate of the estate suddenly shattered into countless pieces, Cheyenne then made a dramatically epic entrance onto the scene, and he brought with him a worthless piece of refuse named Shijun. Now, Mr. Song certainly could not fret about him failing to appear. There was, however, one significant caveat. Shijun had arrived in quite the undesirable condition, but our hero had courageously come to this veritable hornet's nest entirely by himself. Mr. Song was profoundly aghast to witness his son in such a pitiable state. He couldn't possibly fathom how a supposed loser, an impoverished individual like Shine, would dare to inflict such an outrage upon his own son, and then have the audacity to come to their ancestral family estate, obliterating everything that stood defiantly in his path. Song immediately commanded the assembled clan to eliminate this insolent, audacious young man. A dozen or so armed bandits instantly surged forward towards our hero. Cheyenne could only chuckle derisively at their utter foolishness. He calmly closed his eyes while mentally preparing a fiery, devastating greeting for them. And when he reopened his eyes a moment later, incandescent flames erupted violently. Cheyenne tagged each advancing bandit with an ethereal mark, and after that inescapable branding, nothing could possibly save them anymore. Thus, our hero effortlessly advanced through their disorganized lines without any significant problems, and the searing flames selectively struck only those who dared to try and impede him. Now he stood alone, face to face with the thoroughly terrified Mr. Song, who had instantaneously lost every shred of his previous arrogance. Behind Cheyenne, the smoldering remnants of the defeated gang writhed helplessly in the lingering flames, and our hero was poised to make the primary villain pay dearly. But even cornered, outmatched, and scared to the point of death, Song was not yet prepared to completely surrender. He possessed one final, desperate, hidden trump card concealed up his sleeve, a firearm, and he fully intended to utilize it without a moment's hesitation. However, just as he decisively pulled the trigger, Cheyenne expertly employed his flame control ability and violently detonated the gun, directly within the villain's unfortunate, trembling hand. Mr. Song was grievously injured in both hands simultaneously. Our hero merely scoffed derisively at him, remarking caustically that he shouldn't have foolishly played with gunpowder. Cheyenne himself couldn't quite get enough of his burgeoning new strength, even though he was currently of a relatively low-level void. The fire element granted him truly incredible and versatile abilities with it. He could, at this point, simultaneously manipulate up to 10 distinct flame sources, with a combined destructive volume of up to 10 square meters. But if there were any volatile explosives situated nearby, the destructive potential could be amplified even further. While our hero was deep in thought, Song seized this momentary lapse to desperately reach the ancestral altar and frantically seek the divine intervention and help from his ancestors. The formidable ancestor spirit, naturally, could not possibly permit the Song family's very last remaining heir to be utterly destroyed. Therefore, it unleashed its own potent flame power to viciously attack Xiaoyang. The sheer, overwhelming power of this divine flame, significantly amplified by the malevolent evil spirits, was so immense that even our formidable hero could do nothing against it. He even sustained substantial, painful damage and was momentarily forced to retreat a little. Simultaneously, almost miraculously, the grievous wounds of Mr. Song and the rest of the surviving clan members were instantly healed. Now, he had fully regained his shattered confidence in himself and the perceived omnipotent strength of his ancestors once again. And he began to gloatingly promise a very swift and painful demise for our hero. This time, Cheyenne was confronting a genuinely, truly formidable and terrifying opponent. To put it mildly, it was an actual bona fide deity. Our hero genuinely hadn't anticipated the wealthy Song family possessing their own personal, godlike protector, especially not before the actual end of the world. After all, his initial, rather modest plan was simply to purloin a few valuable ancient artifacts and thereby make some quick money. But the situation had evidently turned out to be far more complicated than he originally thought. The enraged, powerful god, now fully intending to obliterate him utterly, was clearly not a factor included in his initial, carefully laid plans. Fortunately, with incredible agility, Cheyenne managed to narrowly evade the deity's first devastating blow. However, the immensely powerful deity was by no means prepared to cease its assault. It repeatedly attempted to swat him down as if he were merely an insignificant fly. At one particular perilous point, it even appeared as though it had decisively succeeded. Witnessing this apparent triumph, Mr. Song prematurely began to celebrate his perceived victory. But very soon, the triumphant expression on his face rapidly contorted to one of utter shock and horror. What could possibly have caused this abrupt reversal? Well, the answer was surprisingly simple. Our boy was completely safe and entirely sound, and he was also audaciously riding the god itself. To fully comprehend what transpired, we must rewind time just a little bit. Just a critical moment before the deity's attack. Daji, the fox spirit, had urgently informed Xiaoyang that the formidable deity presently before him was, in fact, a natural fire spirit, thanks to the continuous burning of the family incense. It had successfully managed to accumulate a vast reservoir of soul power over the course of the past 1,000 arduous years, and now it stood literally one crucial step away from fully descending to earth in its complete, true corporeal body. If our guys somehow somehow manage to capture and absorb it, he would be able to significantly strengthen his own nascent fire abilities, as well as substantially bolster his own personal soul power. Currently, his powerful token critically lacked sufficient soul power, but if he dared to undertake the considerable risk involved, there might just be a tangible chance of ultimate victory. Cheyenne didn't entirely grasp what Daji was cryptically alluding to, and queried exactly what she implied. She elaborated that to achieve this feat, he needed to painstakingly extract his own vital soul power, and then carefully infuse it directly into the token of great crimes. Then, he merely needed to issue a decisive command, and summon one of the formidable ancient prisoners to aid him. Cheyenne realized that he could, in fact, accomplish this. However, there was a grave risk. In the unfortunate event that he failed in capturing the powerful Firestar Lord and perished, the very entity he had summoned could potentially escape from its ancient prison. The insidious Daji then inquired if he was truly willing to undertake such a monumental risk. But our astute boy had absolutely no intention of blindly following her manipulatively. The cunning fox spirit offered him two distinct options, but he ingeniously chose a third, unforeseen alternative. The very next moment, he began to channel potent hellfire from his right eye directly into the waiting token, utterly shocking Daji. She had not anticipated this particular turn of events at all. When she demanded to know what he was doing, Xiaoyan coolly replied that if he were to die, the infused hellfire would completely incinerate and destroy the token. And without the existence of the token, absolutely no one in the entire world would ever be able to reopen the prison. In other, more direct words, the imprisoned entities would never again behold the sunlight. Now, they possessed no alternative but to act entirely in Xiaoyan's best interests. Moreover, they would now have a very compelling motivation to actively protect him. Without a single second's further hesitation, Xiaoyan initiated the process of opening the interdimensional summoning gate. The various prisoners confined within the dark dungeons couldn't help but intensely feel it. Many of them instantly started screaming and desperately begging to be finally let out. However, on this particular occasion, our hero was firmly determined to summon the great and terrible demon, Black Bear. As soon as the mystical cell doors were finally unsealed, the colossal bear furiously rushed outside. Knowing its volatile character well, Daji urgently shouted in its formidable way that the current warden, Cheyenne, absolutely must not die under any circumstances. Once fully manifested in the real world, the mighty Black Bear violently knocked the surprised fire god sprawling to the ground, who clearly hadn't expected to encounter such a formidable being. But most significantly of all, the bear was immensely overjoyed to finally be free after such a long, arduous confinement. He was incredibly happy to once again behold the warm sunlight, and even began to wave his massive paws about vigorously in sheer delight. However, Cheyenne quickly and sternly brought him back to his senses. His own diminishing soul power wouldn't be sufficient for an extended, protracted matchmaking session. So, he decisively ordered the bear to act without any further delay. The formidable Black Bear did not dare to cross our determined hero, and replied that he had indeed made the correct strategic choice when he had decided to summon him. He then furiously charged towards the startled fire god and began to viciously strike him. Such a comparatively low-ranked deity simply didn't stand a fighting chance. All of the desperate fire god's frantic attempts to do anything were entirely to no avail. He was shamefully and utterly defeated, with absolutely no opportunity to effectively retaliate. In addition, his divine, ethereal body had just crossed the dimensional line, making it utterly impossible for him to fully utilize all of his considerable strength. He desperately tried to retreat, but Xiaoyan decisively did not permit him to do so. Skillfully using the ancient immortal rope, he firmly bound the struggling fire deity, who could now only scream in utter, helpless panic. Now, this represented our hero's complete and unconditional decisive victory. The Song family's once powerful ancestor, now completely deprived of his divine power, was just as much of a pathetic failure as his descendants. Now, Mr. Song had irrevocably lost all lingering hope of achieving victory, and he collapsed dejectedly to the unforgiving ground, utterly helpless, but gazing intently at the mystical rope that now bound his ancestor. He suddenly remembered precisely where he had encountered it before. It was the exact same rope that Xiaoyan had shrewdly taken from the ancient artifact, just before he had foolishly purchased it. Our hero merely laughed mockingly at the rich, defeated loser, thanks to whom, ironically, he was able to acquire a rope capable of binding even immortals completely free of charge. Poor, dejected Mr. Song had no recourse left but to weep disconsolately like a small child. His precious, revered ancestor, whose immense power his family had diligently and sacrificially fueled for thousands of long years, was now rapidly and irreversibly vaporizing right before his horrified eyes. In the very end, his mighty ancestor, once a huge, terrifying fire spirit, had disappointingly transformed into a tiny, insignificant spiritual crystal, which Xiaoyan could now effortlessly and casually hold within a single hand. The Song family's entire, vast ancestral inheritance was now firmly within his possession, now that absolutely everything was securely in his capable hands. Our guy coolly proposed to discuss a new, binding deal, one that a desperate Mr. Song would be utterly unable to refuse. Shijun, surprisingly, turned out to still be alive, although he was still pathetically slumped over and barely conscious. So, Shia magnanimously offered to allow him to keep living in direct exchange for absolutely all of the vast Song family's accumulated money. That was an undeniably low and painful blow to a notoriously greedy bastard like Mr. Song. But he astutely knew that once the prophesied apocalypse finally arrived, all this earthly money would become completely worthless in any case. In the end, he reluctantly but pragmatically agreed, and Xiaoyan promptly received the enormous sum of money and swiftly departed to utilize it quickly. Shijun simply couldn't process or believe what had just transpired. He couldn't even begin to imagine a life of being impoverished. But a strangely calm Mr. Song attempted to placate him, reassuring him that all that money would soon become utterly useless anyway. And the truly important thing now was to save and diligently gather as many loyal people as possible to the remaining handful of surviving, terrified subordinates. Mr. Song sternly ordered them to maintain absolute silence about what had occurred here, and to hurry up and immediately sell all their valuable properties. Then, they were instructed to exchange all the money they received for essential rice and water. All the vital supplies they managed to purchase would have to be transported to the secure shelter, located deep beneath Mr. Song's expansive country villa. There's ample room there, he claimed, and a quite decent stockpile of necessary weapons. He also specifically instructed them to immediately contact a certain old man Wan, and to buy up any and all ancient, powerful artifacts they could possibly find. Mr. Song was simply seething with fury that Xiao Yin was apparently the only one to be the very first person who successfully acquired these extraordinary abilities, especially because the foretold end of the world was rapidly approaching. But he firmly believed that this wasn't necessarily the end of their world, and if all the capable children of the illustrious Song family astutely took advantage of this unprecedented opportunity, the end of the current world could very well be the glorious beginning of their global domination. But as for that troublesome Xiaoyan, Mr. Song was now prepared to do absolutely everything he could to make his remaining, albeit short, life a veritable living hell. Meanwhile, our resourceful hero strategically headed to the largest, most well-stocked pharmacy in the city. Thanks to the Song family's ill-gotten, but now his, money, he now possessed a staggering sum of almost 29 million. Of course, if he had been afforded significantly more time, he would undoubtedly have learned much more about the intricacies of the Song family. But for now, he really should try to forget about them, because the truly paramount thing was to meticulously prepare for the impending apocalypse. At the bustling pharmacy, Shine decisively ordered an astonishing 1,000 shanking pills all at once. Naturally, the attending pharmacist was utterly shocked that someone could possibly need so many units of such an ordinary, common medicine, typically used to reduce fever and neutralize minor poisons. Our pragmatic guy wasn't about to explain all the complex details to her. He simply desired to purchase everything he needed as quickly as possible. If they didn't possess the specific items he required, he could easily take his considerable business to a competitor. Of course, she certainly didn't want to lose such a valuable valuable customer. But to actually fulfill such an extraordinarily large order, she would regrettably need some time, and the complete delivery would take at least 2 days. Cheyenne already knew that. There were only approximately 10,000 of these crucial shanking pills available in this entire city, the vast majority of which were primarily sold through online channels. You're likely wondering why on earth he required so many of these seemingly obscure, ordinary pills. Well, when the devastating apocalypse finally and inevitably begins, this currently unremarkable medicine will suddenly become the single most vital and important material. In his traumatic past life, Xia Yin was horrifically infected with a potent zombie virus and suffered immensely from its debilitating and terrifying symptoms. He desperately didn't want to die, but tragically, nothing ultimately depended on him. No matter how valiantly his devoted little sister, Xia Yun, desperately tried, she simply could not locate the life-saving shanking pill in time to save it. As it tragically turned out, the humble shanking pill was the one and only medicine that could significantly accelerate the crucial awakening of latent supernatural abilities, and was also remarkably effective in suppressing the dreaded zombie virus. Unfortunately, they hadn't known about this critical fact beforehand, and tragically, all the available pills had already become completely unobtainable. Xia Yun had bravely ventured to a distant, dangerous pharmacy, desperately hoping to find the vital medicine for her beloved, ailing brother, completely ignoring Cheyenne's frantic pleas not to venture out there, because it was exceedingly perilous and dangerous outside. Tragically, she was caught by vicious villains who felt utterly free during the chaotic apocalypse. Cheyenne, heart-wrenchingly, never saw her again in that tragic previous life. But this time, he was absolutely, fiercely determined not to let that horrific outcome happen again. As for the scheming Song family, they now know that the end of the world is indeed coming, and will most assuredly begin to stock up on essential food supplies. But our hero, with foresight, fervently hoped that they remained ignorant about the truly most important resource during the chaotic early stages of the impending apocalypse, which is not mundane food at all, but rather the invaluable awakened individuals possessing supernatural powers. If Xia Yin could successfully get his hands on a substantial cache of shanking pills, he would consequently be able to gain access to numerous diverse abilities that would effectively make him as powerful as an entire army. He then took out his mystical token and commanded his potent hellfire to ignite fiercely. By doing so, he completely consumed the captured fire spirit that he had previously sealed within the Song family's desecrated ancestral estate. Immediately thereafter, he successfully awakened the formidable power of the Flaming Lotus, and Daji, ever observant, didn't miss such an opportune moment to warmly congratulate the warden for so successfully and significantly improving his inherent ability. With the newly acquired power of the Flaming Lotus, Xiaoyan would now be capable of effortlessly breaking through formidable barriers and dispelling complex illusions. For instance, right now, the disorienting illusion of the wine. Lake and meat forest will no longer pose any significant hindrance to our hero. But that is certainly not all. Also now, he can far more accurately and precisely control the very shape of his fire, and even skillfully create a devastating flaming sword for his personal use, surpassing Giant's initial estimations, as one might readily surmise. This particular skill wasn't restricted to just one flaming sword. The instant he crossed into the dungeon's threshold, Black Bear and Sadaji immediately commenced their battle for his notice. The entire reason? This particular dungeon operated on a sin karma principle. Each time the incarcerated individuals executed tasks for their warden, their burden of sin karma would subsequently decrease, and the harshness of their confinement conditions would be mitigated. For instance, a certain Black Bear brought his sin karma down to 90 for his assistance in battling an ancient fire spirit progenitor, and was thereby rewarded with a supplementary serving of meat for it. Such an overabundance of attention from the detainees did not delight our protagonist, and he promptly dismissed them. The Thunder Raven, meanwhile, observed all of this. He harbored a deep disdain for these feeble sycophants, who were willing to prostrate themselves before the warden for a minor benefit. And he cautioned our protagonist that if he ever dared to summon him, he would undoubtedly live to regret that very action. After all, he would not comply and would instead make his escape from captivity. Cheyenne, however, was not the least bit troubled by this, as his own powers steadily increased. He would eventually unlock the next level, containing far more powerful inmates, and the Thunder Raven would then become entirely redundant for his purposes. When that particular moment finally arrived, the Thunder Raven would be the one reduced to pleading for our hero to utilize it, as Yayun's personal might continue to flourish. The Warden's official token also surged with newfound energy. This development arrived at the most opportune moment, because the ominous Crimson Moon was expanding larger and larger, and the cataclysmic end times were drawing closer with each day. Our protagonist needed to act with considerable speed and deplete his remaining financial resources as quickly as possible. The following day, Cheyenne made his appearance at a jewelry auction. Here, his goal was to secure an exceedingly powerful ancient artifact. Once the apocalyptic era finally dawned, all the conventional resources would be swiftly pillaged by survivors. But their significance paled in comparison to ability-enhancing cores, which could only be acquired by vanquishing zombies or employing scarce, powerful artifacts. Precisely such an artifact had been located by our protagonist. With its assistance, he would be empowered to elevate his abilities, progressing from the current second tier to the third echelon. In his prior existence, one exceptionally fortunate individual acquired this very stone and had cultivated his unique abilities ahead of everyone else, thereby securing a multitude of significant advantages. But this time around, it would be our hero seizing that opportunity. Several hours later, the moment arrived. The coveted stone was finally presented for auction, starting at 3 million. According to the appraiser's initial estimations, it became clear that this unrefined stone harbored immense potential value, and the precious jadeite concealed within could command a price of at least 5 million. Instantly, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Eager bidders immediately began to escalate the offers, gradually reaching 4 million. But then, unexpectedly, some ostentatiously wealthy tycoon declared 5 million in one go. And just like that, all other contenders seemingly lost their nerve. Because if this particular magnate expressed serious interest in the item, the remaining hopefuls had no desire to directly oppose him, fully aware that he helmed one of the largest corporations in all of China. As a magnanimous gesture for them, not impeding his acquisition, he cordially invited everyone for drinks on his tab, their next meeting. Then, dramatically, Cheyenne strode into the hall and elevated the bid to 6 million. Everyone in the vicinity was thoroughly bewildered about this student's sudden appearance, and, more importantly, where he'd acquired such funds to even participate. One of the auction's organizers immediately hastened towards our protagonist, looking concerned, and politely informed him that they operated under a membership system there, and that to actively participate in the ongoing auction, one needed to possess a black bank card as verification of financial solvency. As fortune would have it, with tens of millions already in his account, Cheyenne was already equipped with precisely such a bank card. The very moment this official laid eyes upon the card, his entire demeanor underwent a remarkable transformation. Meanwhile, the auction itself had resumed its fervent pace, and the young lady conducting the auction inquired if anyone else wished to bid higher. Naturally, that particular affluent individual was not about to capitulate so easily, and defiantly increased his own bid to a substantial 7 million. But alas, this bold counter-move proved insufficient for him. Cheyenne, unfazed, didn't alter his course and instantly bid 10 million. The entire assembly was utterly flabbergasted by such a monumental bid. It dramatically surpassed the anticipated value of the processed gemstone within. The young woman accompanying that wealthy tycoon advised him to regain his composure and to cease engaging in a battle of pride with this apparent nobody, who, in her eyes, was merely posturing with false affluence. Remarkably, he actually heeded her words and decided to withdraw his bid, but not before pointedly asking her for our protagonist's name, and made a vow to remember his name and this impressive display of his. Perhaps, he mused, their next encounter would unfold differently, and victory would then surely be on his side. At long last, Cheyenne had successfully acquired what he desired, even just by cradling the container holding the precious stone in his hands. He could distinctly sense its potent energy as his eye blazed with scarlet flames. With his mission accomplished, there was nothing further for our guy here, and so he turned and proceeded towards the main exit. Behind him, the auctioneer was presenting the very next lot, an antique feather fan exquisitely inlaid with numerous precious gemstones. Giant had barely reached the exit threshold when, suddenly, terrified shrieks about some monster echoed from behind him, and desperate pleas for immediate assistance were heard from behind him. A chaotic scramble ensued as everyone desperately tried to save themselves, as the spectral form of an enormous serpent violently burst forth from the fan. This particular serpent possessed an unervingly human-like face and soared directly towards our hero, completely disregarding everyone else. Cheyenne, observing this, quickly speculated that the sudden summoning of this monstrous entity might have been a direct result of the fact that this fan had, prior to the auction, been resting in very close proximity to the stone, and had thereby managed to absorb a portion of its potent energy. Furthermore, the end of the world itself was drawing ever closer, a fact which also likely contributed to the monster's increased power. After all, the entire world was teetering on the brink of absolute chaos, and so such unearthly occurrences were merely subtle premonitions of the vast disaster to come. That wealthy, blonde-haired man, however, was certainly no coward at all, and when confronted by this completely unknown and terrifying danger, he didn't immediately scurry for cover like most of the others. Instead, he boldly attempted to strike the serpent with a telescopic baton, but much to his surprise, his attack yielded absolutely no discernible result. The serpent seemed entirely unfazed by his blow and continued its charge straight at Xiaoyan. To the absolute astonishment of everyone present, Xiaoyan didn't even budge, as he expertly seized the serpent's neck, cinching a fiery collar around, thanks to his newly enhanced flame control. Subduing this overgrown serpentine creature proved remarkably easy. He then proceeded to activate his potent lotus flame, and the intense conflagration began to systematically dismantle this spirit's ethereal form. Within a matter of mere seconds, all that remained of the once mighty serpent was another shimmering spirit crystal. If Xiaoyan were to utilize this, he could potentially acquire new abilities. However, judging by the fact that this spirit's overall power level wasn't exceptionally high, he would most likely only be able to derive a relatively minor ability from it. Cheyenne was just about to take his leave when that same rich, blonde-haired man from earlier suddenly dropped to his knees behind him. He had instantly recognized that our hero was indeed a true master, and now ardently wished to become his disciple to attain similar incredible power himself. However, for that, he would undoubtedly have to wait his turn. All things would unfold in their due course. A couple of hours later, the entire front area of Cheyenne's house was now cluttered with boxes, and numerous cages filled with various live animals. This entire scene naturally began to attract the keen attention of his neighbors. They were understandably puzzled as to how Xiaoyan had suddenly become so affluent, and the precise reasons why he had purchased so many varied things. The general consensus among them was that he was likely to start his own business, and, for the most part, were genuinely happy for him. However, not every single one of them was quite so benevolent. There was one particularly spiteful lady who disliked seeing Cheyenne prosper. She was utterly convinced that he would never actually manage to open his own store, but the primary underlying reason was that this Annie Jiang coveted the warehouse space, the very same one that currently belonged to Xia Yan. She desperately wanted to get her hands on it to open her own little store. Of course, this was a desire she wouldn't openly admit to anyone. Now, at that very moment, our protagonist himself arrived and paid absolutely no attention to the assembled crowd of neighbors. He simply strode directly past all of these curious onlookers, already contemplating what else he could possibly purchase with the money still left over after his initial spree of buying supplies. As he drew closer, the delivery personnel formally informed him that they had indeed delivered everything, and courteously asked if Cheyenne wished to meticulously count every single item. But our protagonist had absolutely no intention of wasting his valuable time on that. Besides, another entire vehicle loaded with goods was scheduled to arrive tomorrow, and it was highly probable the entirety of the goods wouldn't fit in this warehouse. Or at the very least, that's what the delivery crew had surmised. In order to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention to his unique abilities, Cheyenne prudently decided that he would personally collect everything himself, directly from their main central warehouse on the following day. Annie Jiang overheard this entire exchange and was visibly shaking with pure envy. She simply couldn't fathom how Jia Yin had managed to become so incredibly rich. She knew perfectly well that he was merely an ordinary, unassuming orphan, one who had tragically lost his parents a long time ago. And now, he had the sheer audacity to get in her way. How dare he open a shop in the very spot she had first desired? Meanwhile, her incorrigible little rascal of a grandson declared he needed to urinate. And it certainly appeared that she wasn't exactly raising him with proper manners. This ill-mannered little brat, to deal with such a pressing case, made a beeline straight for our hero's newly delivered boxes. This particular kid was truly and utterly shameless, it seemed. His grandmother's reaction to this display was anything but appropriate. She even commended him and started to justify his behavior right in front of Cheyenne, arguing that because he was small, he could essentially do whatever he pleased. Our protagonist, however, was not about to tolerate such nonsense. He swiftly grabbed the little miscreant by the collar and promptly returned him to Annie Jiang. And in that very same moment, the little tyke also somehow managed to give her an unexpected golden shower. I mean, what did you really expect? It's a classic silly Chinese manhwa gag, and the comedic stylings are often, well, quite consistent in their nature. Annie Jiang naturally flew into a rage, sputtering that Cheyenne couldn't behave like that. The boy was merely playing, and Cheyenne was treating him so very poorly. Of course, at this point, the little brat started to wail loudly. However, none of this theatrical display seemed to bother our hero whatsoever. This was, after all, his private property, and they should keep their distance. So he simply and decisively slammed the warehouse gate right in their faces. Annie Jiang, on the other side, was practically twisting with unbridled anger. Oh, how desperately she now wanted to exact some form of revenge on him. Her grandson, meanwhile, ever the agent of chaos, now suddenly wanted to play with some noisy firecrackers and perhaps scare a few of the neighbors with the loud explosions. And that's precisely when she was struck by a brilliant, wicked idea. She'd buy a massive stash of firecrackers, not just for her precious grandson, but also for herself. And then, later that very evening, the two of them would orchestrate an unforgettable little fire show. Together, surely some errant spark would conveniently hit the side of the warehouse, and consequently cause a raging fire in Xia Yan's newly stocked warehouse. And, oh, she simply couldn't wait to see the look on his face afterward. Meanwhile, our protagonist had securely locked himself inside the warehouse, far from any prying eyes, and began shifting all the boxes and cages into his personal prison dimension. Sadaji, with evident glee, happily welcomed the arrival of all these new supplies, and not without good reason, for she, as a particularly cunning fox, had her own very specific plans for the chickens. She would finally be able to feast properly, or so she eagerly hoped. Cheyenne, of course, had absolutely no inkling about any of this whatsoever. So he merely instructed her to systematically place all the new supplies in the empty cells. Sadaji, it turned out, considered herself quite the expert in storing various supplies. She even proactively advised Xiaoyan to allocate a dedicated area near the main tower, specifically for the purpose of keeping all the live animals. After all, if the animals were to be consistently infused with the unique aura of the tower, their meat would, in theory, become even more exceptionally delicious, and thus they would effectively have an endless, self-sustaining supply of chicken to eat. This particular piece of advice from Sadaji actually helped our hero to come up with something even more strategically interesting. After all, the end of the world was rapidly approaching, and absolutely no one knew for certain just how long it would last. Therefore, a far more prudent strategy would be to introduce an even greater variety of different animals into this prison dimension, a crucial step that could potentially help keep human civilization alive and kicking. Hearing this, Black Bear advised Xiaoyan not to limit his efforts to just animals, but to also start cultivating a wide variety of edible plants here as well. But for that ambitious endeavor, he would first need quality seeds and fertile soil. Only then would he truly be able to grow and sustainably multiply his vital supplies, instead of just endlessly and unsustainably storing finite supplies in the prison's empty cells, a strategy that would inevitably lead to them running out sooner or later anyway. Fortunately, our forward-thinking Cheyenne had already purchased more than enough seeds, but the ground surrounding the dungeon itself was currently barren and quite empty. It was completely arid and thus entirely unsuitable for any kind of agriculture. Fortunately, our hero was not one to be easily deterred by such an obstacle, and he quickly came up with a very practical and simple solution indeed. He promptly made his way to the nearest accessible suburban area, specifically to a large, empty field, and there he decided to experiment a bit, to see just how much actual land from the real world his prison dimension could contain. Cheyenne then began the process of collecting as much soil as his current ability could possibly hold. Sadaji, witnessing such an overwhelming torrent of incoming soil, and instantly realized that this particular endeavor would not end well for her personally, and frantically began to shout for our hero to immediately stop his actions. But, alas, no one was paying any attention to her desperate pleas. In the end, the poor fox was almost completely buried alive by the deluge. Eventually, Cheyenne's current soul power simply wasn't enough for more, and the available dimensional space was far too small to accommodate even more soil. Even so, our industrious guy still managed to gather a whopping 200 tons of soil, although, in his ambitious eyes, even that incredible amount didn't seem to be enough. After all, he knew with absolute certainty that once the apocalypse properly began, all of the surrounding land would rapidly become completely unusable for growing plants, and the currently rich and fertile land available right here in the vicinity would very soon become an incredibly valuable and exceedingly rare resource indeed. Therefore, in his strategic mind, there was absolutely no more time to waste. Meanwhile, his malevolent neighbor, Annie Jiang, began to enact her nefarious scheme and procured an entire crate filled with firecrackers. She simply could not contain her anticipation of watching Cheyenne's warehouse incinerate. Abruptly, her grandson scurried up to her, clutching an antiquated mirror in his grasp, and urged her to peer into its reflective surface. Jiang was oblivious to its origins, and speculated he might have pilfered it from the establishment, where they had acquired the pyrotechnics. But rather than reprimanding him for thievery, she extolled her astute grandson for bestowing presents upon his grandmother. There's a definite dysfunction within this family unit, this deranged grandson proclaimed. There was an entity within that looking glass who earnestly desired to make his grandmother's acquaintance, so he compelled her to gaze into the mirror. Directly from its depths stared back at her, a fiend from archaic myths and age-old legends. Yet he was more animate than any living being. Terrified, Jiang instantly discarded the mirror, frightened beyond measure. But her grandson immediately dashed to retrieve her mirror, convinced as he was that the grandmother is exceedingly vain, and her own visage. He forced her to look at herself once more, and on this occasion, the demon successfully breached into this plane, discovering an appropriate vessel to commandeer her physical form. After all, Jiang was as malevolent internally as the fiends themselves. Her grandson, resembling a genuine lunatic, cackled and expressed a desire for further amusement, but he would most certainly not appreciate the subsequent diversions now. His grandmother had become as monstrous externally as she was internally, and her grandson was her initial casualty. The cataclysm had commenced. The sanguine moon had achieved its peak dimension, poised to congeal the planet in perpetuity, and myriad phantoms and fiends erupted into this reality to chastise a depraved humankind. Meanwhile, the final vestiges of solar illumination were still discernible along the coastline, proximate to the harbor. Warehouses, yet piercing through the ominous, gathering cumulonimbus clouds. Existence persisted at its customary rhythm, and when the angling vessel returned with its haul, everyone was astounded. All the captured aquatic life was mutated, blemished with festering sores and sharp dentition. The angler was uncertain if they could even consume them. They possessed no inkling regarding the impending apocalypse, and presumed the fish were altered due to effluent and marine contamination. Within the storage facility, a forklift operator arrived to retrieve merchandise. But something was amiss with the warehouse supervisor. He offered no reply, but remained seated, silent and timorous. There was unequivocally something awry with this individual. It appears the zombification contagion reached him initially. The forklift operator conjectured that his colleague merely had a common ailment and advised him to take a leave of absence and return to his dwelling. Abruptly, a multitude of footsteps became audible, and the storage facility was inundated with individuals clad in dark attire. They inquired whether any shanking pills were present in the warehouse, but the warehouse employee responded that all the merchandise herein has already been procured by the client. If they desire to make a transaction, they ought to communicate with the sales director and submit a requisition. Their enterprise will endeavor to satisfy the order as expeditiously as feasible. But the individuals in formal wear were not inclined to tolerate. They intended to relocate everything from this location immediately, and they were utterly indifferent to the loader's protests. One of them simply approached him and seized him by the shoulder and hurled him as if he were a mere plaything directly onto his ailing supervisor. The same man urged the others to expedite the loading process. Suddenly, something grasped his lower limb and, with its talons, it felled the large man with astonishing might. The warehouse supervisor had lost his sanity and transformed into an undead creature, possessing preternatural strength. The other men, in dark suits, instantly brandished their armaments. A common spade has invariably proven effective in combat against zombies, correct? Collectively, they succeeded in dispatching the prostrate zombie and liberating the chieftain of their contingent. The zombie was vanquished, yet no one comprehended what had just transpired. Furthermore, the gang leader bore a profound talon injury on his leg, and the zombification pathogen had already commenced its infiltration into his system. But he paid no heed to that. His primary concern was adhering to directives and acquiring the medication. Should anyone attempt to obstruct their progress, they were to be neutralized without delay. Abruptly, a vocalization hailed them from the entryway. They were entirely unprepared for any callers. It's Xia Yin, who arrived to procure the medication he had personally financed, and these scoundrels are endeavoring to purloin them. The cataclysm hasn't entirely commenced just yet, and these imbeciles are already hastening towards their demise. The gang's chieftain, however, held a contrary view. He asserted that this whole logistical port, encompassing all the adjacent edifices, was the property of his superior. The merchandise hadn't departed the port yet, so why wouldn't Cien extend them a minor courtesy and rescind his order? For this, he could request any remuneration he desired. But our protagonist was not inclined to trade one of the most precious commodities for currency that would soon hold no significance. Cien granted these marauders a mere 60 seconds to vacate the warehouse. Failing that, they would encounter exceedingly disagreeable repercussions. Noticing the deceased form of the supervisor, he observed that the undead had already materialized. Thus, there was even less available time than he had anticipated. Regrettably for the marauders, they lacked the prudence to withdraw and instead opted to launch an assault. Yet, even when attacking from his blind side, none among them succeeded in even making contact with Xia Yan. He moved with such celerity that he appeared to have dematerialized. Scanning their surroundings, the ruffians eventually located him, yet they remained unable to comprehend how such rapid movement was achievable. Xia Yin unsealed one of the containers brimming with provisions and determined that, as recompense for their insolence, he would confiscate all the merchandise from the logistics hub along with him, given their assertion that it all pertained to their superior. Petrified, the gang leader inquired about his intentions. Our protagonist merely enlightened them to a new paradigm. It is essential to utilize the adversary's own knowledge against them. After all, they were the ones who sought to despoil him. But now, he would be the one to despoil them. The ruffians attempted to offer opposition, but Xia Yan's conflagrations afforded them no opportunity. Following a couple of hours, the battered ruffians crept back to their superior. Their superior proved to be a rather unconventional lady. She was simply incensed that her underlings not only failed to retrieve the medications, but forfeited all other merchandise as well. The chieftain of the gang commenced his justification that the individual who confiscated everything from them possessed extraordinary abilities. He wasn't merely a man, but a veritable monster. Cheyenne, ejected them from the warehouse, and secured the entrance behind him. When they succeeded in unsealing the door, the warehouse was already completely devoid of contents. There had been such an abundance of items within. Yet in a mere instant, nothing whatsoever remained. Now, the sole matter that piqued the lady's curiosity was the identity of this particular man. One of her gang members stated he had cross-referenced the pill's information. Customer and discovered his name was Giant. The lady pondered this revelation. She comprehended that she was not the sole individual possessing unique abilities, and she earnestly desired to secure a man with spatial storage capabilities. Abruptly, the leader of her contingent began to convulse and emit guttural sounds like a feral beast, and in the subsequent moment, he collapsed onto the floor. It appears the zombification pathogen has overcome him, and the lady ought to evacuate this location immediately. Yet, the lady did not appear to be alarmed in the slightest. Furthermore, she instantaneously deduced that the contagion had already infiltrated the man's cerebrum, and that even medicinal intervention would not rescue him. Given that no remedy was available, she instructed the others to incinerate the man, cautioning them to exercise prudence and avoid any sanguineous contact with him. But abruptly, the man stirred and lunged towards the lady. It would appear her demise was imminent. Yet instead of absconding, the lady commenced amassing mystical energy within her hand. Myriad animate branches surged into the chamber and impaled the man. Now it was evident why the lady exuded such confidence. Once the undead were dispatched, she addressed the remaining astounded sentinels, instructing them not to be taken aback by such occurrences, for this was merely the inception. She directed them to persist in their search for medicaments and to amass armaments, and to utilize the warehouse as a central operations point. Only these preparatory measures could safeguard them from what awaited. And what awaited them was a veritable inferno, and the lady was acutely cognizant of this fact. Concurrently, Cheyenne inquired of Cheyenne why he had procured Shan King tablets, to which he retorted that the water and atmosphere were no longer unadulterated. Henceforth, they were obligated to consume solely bottled spring water and ingest 3 shanking tablets on a daily basis. Should Xiaoyun experience an abrupt sensation of coldness, she was to apprise him of it without delay. Xiaoyun failed to grasp the necessity for this and requested Xiaoyun to elucidate the circumstances to her. Our protagonist also considered that the moment was opportune for that as well, so he pledged to his sister to divulge everything during their promenade. Although the cataclysm had not yet fully manifested, an unsettling ambience already permeated the atmosphere. Even Xiaoyun could perceive it with perfect clarity. The cause for this was the demonic entities that were commencing their appearances with increasing regularity, and it wasn't in some remote location. Veritably, peculiar vocalizations were already emanating from the adjoining dwelling. Annie Jiang had already managed to transform into a zombified demon and devour her grandson, forfeiting all semblance of reason. She burst forth from her dwelling, uttering imprecations to unleash pandemonium, brimming with her insatiable avarice. After a brief interval, heart-wrenching screams began to emanate from the residence. Concurrently, Xia Yin, accompanied by Xia Yun, were already entering a higher vehicle. Rulin and her maternal figure were ambulating in the vicinity. The perfidious Rulan was ostentatiously indicating the residence. She intended to cohabit in with Xian, with the aim of re-establishing herself as his romantic partner. She had even incurred substantial debt and undergone the most exorbitant cosmetic surgery available in the nation. In her estimation, Cheyenne would be incapable of resisting such a lure. The motivation for Rulan's actions stemmed from his abrupt acquisition of considerable power, and if she could successfully make him her own, she could exploit his capabilities for her personal gain. Abruptly, they caught sight of Xiaoyan, who was journeying somewhere within a hired vehicle. He represented a valuable asset that could not be overlooked. Thus, they pursued him without a moment's hesitation. Cheyenne and Xiaoyun arrived at the zoological park, where they could already observe the premonitory indicators of the impending cataclysm. The fauna, typically docile in demeanor, for some inexplicable reason, on this particular day, behaved with extreme aggression. En route to this location, Jian had already informed Xiaoyan that the world would soon reach its demise, and that individuals would either transform into zombies or acquire superhuman abilities. Our protagonist refrained from divulging to his sister that harrowing ordeal from his preceding existence. He attributed his foreknowledge of future events to the fact that he had awakened his latent abilities prematurely and could perceive future occurrences. Recognizing the gravity of the circumstances, Cheyenne questioned why they had come to the zoological park instead of finding refuge. Cheyenne retorted that escape could only offer a temporary reprieve and would not resolve the entirety of the predicament. If they harbored any desire to survive the approaching inferno, they must awaken their inherent capabilities. Although he already possessed a sufficient degree of power, he could not remain perpetually by Xiaoyan's side. Consequently, in the event of an unexpected crisis, she must possess the capacity to defend herself. In essence, she too ought to become more formidable. Sister Yun's eyes lit up at the prospect of awakening her own abilities and achieving a level of strength comparable to her brother's. She had absolutely no desire to be a hindrance. The zoological park appeared to have no relevance to this, but we are on the verge of discovering its significance. Throughout this entire period, Ruolin and her equally avaricious mother were observing them. They failed to comprehend why Jian had ventured to the zoological park, but their primary objective was to contrive a fortuitous encounter, during which Ruolin would captivate him with her physical attractiveness. Prior to the rendezvous, she opted to refine her cosmetic application and paused by the enclosure housing the llamas. But something within their crimson ocular organs suggests it would not conclude favorably. Meanwhile, Cheyenne and his sibling arrived at the Colonian sanctuary. Sadaji materialized instantaneously and declared that she perceived something extraordinary in this location. Black Bear did not remain reticent either, and articulated his opinion regarding turtles, which he found entirely disagreeable. They are formidable adversaries, resilient, and possess greater longevity than any other being. At long last, they arrived at the designated location, the most ancient colonian in all of China, and perhaps the entire globe. It was so venerable that its existence was even known to Sadaji and Black Bear. Cheyenne was aware that this particular turtle had resided here since the zoological park's inaugural day, and was undoubtedly in excess of 100 years of age. It had even been bestowed a specific appellation. The placard indicated a long-lived colonian bearing the name Nanny. Such a designation was somewhat unforeseen and not entirely congruous. In its preceding existence, this turtle was renowned because one of the demonic entities attempted to seize control of the zoological park, subsequent to the commencement of the apocalypse. But this ancient colonian obstructed his path. It even managed to bite him. Their confrontation persisted for days, yet the demon never succeeded in breaching its protective shell. Ultimately, the fiend was compelled to withdraw. Cheyenne mused that it would be exceedingly advantageous to persuade this turtle to safeguard Sister Yun. Then, her security would be unequivocally assured. Our protagonist approached the venerable colonian and solicited its assistance, but there was no discernible reply. The turtle merely regarded him with an apathetic gaze. Then, Xia Yan resolved to attempt an alternative approach. He activated his potent lotus conflagration and declared that he felt famished following the excursion and intended to prepare a colonian potage. It was at this juncture that the turtle promptly became animated. He even vocalized, irritated by the fact that humans are vexing creatures. The turtle opined that threatening a being if it failed to respond to you was indicative of a deficiency in decorum. But since they had already arrived, he was amenable to hearing their proposition. Cheyenne stated that the apocalypse is on the verge of commencing, and time is rapidly dwindling, and he requested protection for his younger sister, Yun. Yun expressed astonishment that the turtle possessed the faculty of speech, and that its appellation was Nanny. In actuality, it is a protracted narrative, upwards of a century in the past. The turtle rescued a young lady in the ocean who subsequently established this zoological park. She is the individual who christened him Nanny, and he acquired such a mortifying name due to the unfortunate incident. Centuries have elapsed since that occurrence. Yet, in comparison to the lifespan of this particular turtle, which spans 3 millennia, it is merely a fleeting moment. Sadaji and the Black Bear instantaneously desired to consume the spiritual essence of this turtle, to prolong their own existences by several hundred years. However, our protagonist could not permit them to undertake such an action. Cheyenne once more reiterated his entreaty to safeguard his sister and inquired about the stipulations the turtle had for him to consent to it. Glancing back at the sanguine moon and the general unrest in the vicinity, the ancient Chelonian deliberated for a brief period. He was acutely aware that when the end of the world arrives, turtles will endure suffering comparable to that of humans. Therefore, our protagonist proposed concealing all the turtles from this particular pond within the demon suppression tower. Therein, he could construct an aquatic habitat for them and nurture them into creatures as magnificent as the ancient turtle itself. Upon the mere mention of the demon suppression tower, the ancient turtle's ocular organs flared with intense indignation. He possessed far too intimate knowledge of who was incarcerated within that edifice and who had been responsible for its creation. At its very pinnacle resides the one who formerly held dominion over this realm, and the ancient turtle was his devoted companion. He simply cannot condone an undeserving individual governing this penitentiary. That is the very reason he remained tethered to this location and patiently awaited here for countless centuries the advent of the one who will possess the key to the tower of demon subjugation. The ancient Chelonian harbored doubts that such a youthful lad could effectively manage such a dreadful prison. Should he falter, he could potentially unleash entities of such immense power that the zombie apocalypse would appear as a mere leisurely stroll in comparison. To substantiate his worthiness for the role of prison overseer, Xia Yin must endure the burden of 3 millennia of Chelonian existence. Our protagonist readied himself to absorb the impact, and with the assistance of the Lotus Conflagration, he commenced supporting the immense mass of the turtle. Even the very ground beneath his feet started to give way. But the ordeal did not conclude there. The turtle was progressively enlarging and growing heavier, and it appeared as though the entire clearing was on the verge of collapsing under its immense weight. Ruolin also sensed that something significant was transpiring nearby. She felt certain that Cheyenne was present there and desired to reach that location with utmost speed. Yet, before she could even begin to sprint, her artificial hairpiece was violently dislodged from her cranium, along with a section of her own hair. That was an outcome the wretched woman certainly did not anticipate. The crimson-eyed llama determined it was preferable for this avaricious individual to appear as her authentic self. Ruela employed her handbag and verbal menaces in an attempt to reclaim her wig, but no favorable outcome resulted from her efforts. She merely received a projectile of saliva squarely in her face from a llama. As the concluding embellishment to her cosmetic application, she simply reaped what she had sown.